Fala galera, mais um Boteco Behaviorista começando. Hoje dia 21 de setembro. Setembro? 21 de setembro, começando o nosso Boteco Behaviorista de número 38 para discutir a construção social do conhecimento. Então eu já vou fazer o aviso. Um dos nossos convidados hoje, na verdade, dois nossos convidados estão falando diretamente da Austrália, e um deles é o professor Guerin, que não fala português. Então o nosso boteco de hoje vai ser em inglês a partir de agora. Welcome everybody. We're starting another Boteco Behaviorista, Behaviorist bar. I don't know how to call it. Behavior pub. Yeah, behavior pub. So, and we're here to discuss the social. Como que eu falo em inglês? Social construction of knowledge. Social construction of knowledge. Is it right? Am I correct?
Yeah.
And we're going to start with our introductions. And Cesar, you go first. Introduce yourself to everybody who's watching us.
All right. So good night, good evening, everybody. My name is Cesar Rocha. I'm a PhD student here at UFSCar, São Carlos. And I'm really glad to do this team with Professor Bernard and with those friends Enrique and Marcela and Guilherme. And I guess one of my main interests in behavior analysis is its relations with postmodern thought. And I guess social constructionism is a theme alike of it, so it's going to be really interesting. So, Felipe, now you introduce yourself.
Hey everyone, my name is Felipe. I'm a clinical psychologist. I'm usually a clinical psychologist and psychology teacher in the city of São Paulo, Brazil. And I'm not very familiar with social psychology, so I guess today will be more of a learning experience for me. And I hope to learn a lot with our friends here. Who's next?
Gui.
Gui, introduce yourself.
I'm Guilherme. I'm doing my PhD here, Uni South Australia, with Bernard here. I have always had like an interest in social issues when it comes to behavior analysis, and that's probably it. I mean, I'm not really familiar with like post-structuralism. I mean, I know one thing or two, but not really. So this is going to be interesting. Favorite color is probably green or purple. My star sign is something like Aquarius. What else is important? I don't know. Your height. Height. 6 foot 22. Just kidding. Go on.
Yeah, I forgot to mention I like Star Wars. Bernard Guerin, introduce yourself to our viewers.
Go?
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Bernard Guerin. I'm at the University of South Australia. I started out as a social psychologist, experimental social psychologist, in fact a cognitive experimental social psychologist, but I pretty much explored everything in between. And many years ago I started reading behavior analysis, and I just totally agree with the foundations for it. I disagree with numerous things that's been said in behavior analysis, but the basic framework is what I work with, even if it doesn't look like I do sometimes. And so a long time ago I published this paper. Thank you for your invitation while I'm talking. Thank you for your invitation here. And I'm really sorry that we have to speak English. It's my fault. You all know 2 languages, I know only 1. So it's my lack of ability that's making it, and you may sound like you're talking slowly, but you're talking a different language. I'm the one who can't speak Portuguese, except a little bit, Marcela, a little bit, but not very much. That's about all from me for now.
Although we're speaking English, I'm going to see if I can find someone who can subtitle this presentation at a later time. So.
Oh, that would be good for the main people viewing.
Yeah. Marcela? Okay.
Henrique.
Yeah. Henrique.
My name is My name is Henrique. I study social psychology
because I'm a teacher of social psychology in Universidade Paulista here in São Paulo. I master in behavior analysis from PUC São Paulo, and I study cultural revolution mainly, and I'm interested in that knowledge for two reasons. First, because of the innovation, that is something that I think we can discuss around here, and the second is because we try to understand how the social systems works, and well, I think that Professor Guerin article that you read, and I have the pleasure to translate. Thank you, personal professor, for letting me translate your article with Camila and Ricardo. And well, I think that's a good framework for us to study.
Hello, I am Marcelo Ortolan. I'm a psychologist and I live in Amazon. And I like very much social psychology. I have studied a lot in the college. And I like the way that social psychology look to the social phenomenon. But at some time, I don't think that it could do something. They speak a lot about the problem, but I don't see that they have tools to work with this. Then I go to the behavior analysis, and it's very interesting to do the link with these two kinds of knowledge.
Okay, so this that you just mentioned is a question that we can talk about later. Is social psychology, how practical can it be, and how theoretical? We were actually talking about it a little earlier with Cesar and Henrique. Cesar, how do you think we start our debate today?
Well, one of the ways I'd like to start it, well, I'm here mainly to ask questions.
Yeah,
I'm not really into the subject, but I really like to Bernard if he could introduce the subject. Because Bernard, when I was reading the text you wrote, a brilliant text by the way, I really appreciate the way you start doing a summary of Gergen's and Moscovici perspective on social psychology, and more specifically on social representations, I guess. Social representations, I don't know if that's the original term. And then you made an interpretation, a behavioral interpretation of it, when you talk about the distorted tact and the role of intraverbal behavior. So maybe if you could introduce Moscovici perspective and how we can analyze it in terms of intraverbal behavior and tact and this kind of things, these operands that Skinner described in 1957. What do you think about it?
Okay, so about Skinner's categories, the role of Skinner, or just intraverbals, and what Moscovici calls the virtual worlds.
Well, I don't know what path would be more interesting. So if you want to do your way.
Okay, well, let me just start then. I mean, to me, the main question then is a lot of when I grew up with psychology, a lot of the talk about knowledge was that there was things we do, like ride a bicycle, and then there were things that we called real knowledge that were somehow cognitive, which I don't know what that means anymore. Cognitive, they were stored in the brain. The reason you could remember them is because they were stored as a neural process or something. And it was pretty clear to a lot of people that the knowledge was, I mean, heavily influenced, I would say totally influenced now, by our relationships, our social processes, the societies relationships with you, the way society talked about things, the knowledge wasn't independent. So the question was, well, how do we talk about that then? How do we research? How do we formulate stuff that we can bring the social into it? And there were various ways of doing it. Moscovici, I think, started a long time ago, before anybody else really got onto this. He came from Durkheim, the background of Durkheim. And so he and his colleagues were looking at the societal ways of thinking. So how do people in Australia talk about health compared to people in Sao Paulo talk about health? What are the differences? So he was trying to trying to bring in the social to the knowledge through that way. Then we had people like Guerin come in, who started saying that, more stating without really giving evidence. He more stated that knowledge is social, it's all constructed. Some people went a long way and said everything is constructed, and a lot of people said, because we construct everything, nothing is real except what is socially constructed. And of course, what you do with them is you get a big stick of wood and hit them over the head a few times and ask them, is that socially constructed? Your pain, you don't really feel pain, it's all socially constructed. But a lot of it there is, so it's trying to put the social in there. What I found was that initially, I found that behavior analysis, although most social psychologists said it wasn't any good, and I had people saying I was totally bizarre for studying behavior analysis, actually had some really nice ways of thinking about how knowledge becomes social. So two big things. One was that knowledge wasn't something stored away, it was something we do. So stop thinking about knowledge as an abstract, think about it as, in fact, there was an old philosopher who called it knowledging. Make it a verb. We knowledge. We go knowledging things. So if I talk about the cup, I'm knowledging. So try to make it an active behavior. So that was, a big plus for behavior analysis. And secondly, in Skinner 57, you find him saying, that so much of language, the use of it, is maintained through social contingencies involving people. Now, eventually I had some problems because I don't think they ever, or he ever, thought about what that social is. He didn't think about how it's different for different relationships, how the larger knowledge, like as revolutions and things you were talking about, the knowledge about politics and society is different from my knowledge about Guy and what I will tell you about Guy, the things I know about him. Would you like to hear a few things about? So initially there was, again, knowledge depends on relationships. If I start telling stories about Guy, he's going to turn the computer off, for example. So again, for me the point then was, once I got past that paper, my question was, well, how do we study the relationship part of language? And that's where I found behavior analysts haven't done enough to actually tease apart what the social contingencies are. And that's what I've been trying to do. Now, it was still better than most of the other people trying to... In social psychology, in those days, there were a lot of papers written called Putting the Social Back into Social Psychology. But on the other hand, you had people saying things like, well, it's socially constructed, so all my knowledge is socially constructed. What that means is that I have cognitions that I learn from people and I store those in my head, and that's social. And so they had the idea that social meant social cognitions, something about people stored in my head. So really it wasn't social at all. So what I was trying to do was find a way to talk and then research about how what we say about things, how that is influenced by relationships, people, society, and bigger things like that. So behavior analysis was a nice way to get into that. even though, as I say, I found there wasn't enough detail once you get into it. So when I read Skinner 57, he keeps repeating, these are maintained by generalized social contingencies. But if you look at his examples, there are like almost no examples of conversations in there, no examples of everyday knowledge. He quotes literature, great writers, Shakespeare, but that's not normal knowledge and conversation like we're having now, or when Guy and I chat. So what's the relationships that are determining that talking behavior? Now, since that paper, the other thing that's become very big in psychology, and with me as well, is that people studying discourse analysis, conversational analysis, they started doing a similar thing, but I didn't have them in that paper because they weren't quite big then. Jonathan Potter and Derek Edwards, Margaret Wetherall, they all started working after there, saying the same thing. We've got to study language, conversation, and how conversation begins and is formed, shaped by our relationships, our conversations with people. And they started doing it. They started looking at real conversations, everyday conversations about health and racism and things, and then looking for how social sneaks into those knowledges. Now, I have problems with them, problems with everybody, including myself, but they, I read that paper and I thought, oh, no. I think one of the problems they have is they don't do very much social analysis. The discourse analysts and the conversational analysis, they get people's transcripts of what's been said, and they look at the words in the transcript, like Skinner did. He looked at the words, he categorized the words, but he didn't categorize the social relationships, what's going on in the contingencies, as he would have said. He never really described that properly. He put it in terms of the words. So I think he would have denied that if you said that, this word is attacked, he might have denied that and said words are not tax. The contingency is tacting, but when you read what he wrote, it really reads like these words, this is tacting, this sentence is tacting, this sentence is attacked. So I think he left out analysing the most important part of most of his book. So again, I think it's a great book and I still read it, but once I got to the details, we still needed to know more about how this social impacts. So I think since then, a lot of the social constructionists, discourse analysts, conversational analysts, some of the post-structuralists are all trying to do the same thing. How can we show that some of our knowledge is, really comes from social relations and not just me thinking it in my brain, in my psyche, in my mind, coming up with cognitions and me initiating. And most of those people have a lot of sympathy they're not sympathetic to behaviour analysis, they're certainly not, they hate it, but the principles, they're actually quite, that's what I found in that paper, they're quite compatible. They believe it doesn't emerge from us, what I know, what I say doesn't emerge from us, it emerges in conversation, in reading social things, in acting in social arenas, that's where it's generated. So I've probably talked too much. Yeah.
No, it's nice.
I'm loving it. You can talk all how much you want.
I want to add something. May I? Yep. Okay. Marcella was saying that she was thinking about social psychology and the way she feels like social psychology doesn't have the tools to work with. You think? Yeah. Too fast? Sorry. That social psychology doesn't have the tools to work with like real. Like they don't have the tools to operate and do something.
Social psychology
becomes really descriptive kind of thing. Okay, I can relate to that feeling, but at the same time, I would like to hear your comments on that. I think we have this misapprehension that behavior analysis has like really good tools when it comes to analyzing social behavior, and when we go to like real life, it just doesn't work as well as we think.
I agree.
It's like the concepts are really good when it comes to principles, and that's something I still stick with it. Like the principles of behavior analysis are really nice to work with, like what's going on in real life, like social interactions and stuff like this. But like the concepts themselves, like texts, mens, and introverbals, when you try to use that sort of thing to analyze language in real life, it gets messed up, like really messed up. I'd like to hear comments on that.
My comments again?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, certainly I agree with all of that. Again, if you have a transcript of a conversation and you try saying, well, this is Manding, okay, this person is saying this, and it's reinforced by previous effects that when you've said this, this person does this. Okay, well, where's the data for that? Where do they actually record the social behavior? I don't see that. Now, with discourse analysis, I think you get the same thing. There's a point at which it stops. They say, here are some, in discourse analysis, you'll get a transcript, let's say 2 people sitting at a train station chatting to one another. They won't give any of the social context, who the people are, what they've been reinforced for in the past. You won't know that. And as I said, behavior analysts are not very good at analyzing history. Okay, in principle, what we do depends on my entire history of responding and the consequences of responding. But when you ask the question, well, where are the studies showing how the effects of a previous history, even on a rat in a cage, how that history affects current behavior, you don't find very many papers, even experimental ones. They're always naive animals doing a new schedule for the first time. So, okay, but again, I'm right with Guy in saying that the principles, in principle, it's saying that is important. It's just we don't really know how to do that. So, in essence, what I've been doing since 1992, many years ago, I feel it's so old reading that paper. It's 22 years ago. My God. Since then, I've been trying to do exactly that. How can I get tools to analyze the social behavior along with the language use, along with everything else? What I'm doing may not seem like it's behavior analysis most of the time, but like Guy said, I think it's right. The principles are right there. And in fact, when I'm being naughty, I tell Guy that I'm actually being more of a behavior analyst than Skinner, because if tacting is about the social relationships, I'm investigating that. He never did. He just said, oh, that's tacting, that's because of generalized social reinforcers in the past. But he never studied that. He never got examples of it. He never actually looked at it. Whereas I'm trying to find ways to describe that we can then use. So, more Skinner than Skinner. For that, not with rats. He was far better at rats than I ever was. But I haven't got the answers, strangely enough, but it's going along the way of trying to get the tools to analyze the social so we can put it into that.
That's good.
Well,
Is that good?
one of the things I keep wondering is that when we're talking about distorted texts, well, what are we talking about exactly? Because maybe when you have a small group of people that reinforce some verbal response, and you have a great quote. May I quote you to yourself, Bernard? Because I want to do my question over this. In that article, you wrote that an interesting property of tacting comes from the social basis of the functional consequences. If tacting is under control of a small group of people who reinforce particular verbal reports and punish others, then the characteristics of this group or verbal community can begin to control the knowledge reported, even if the functional consequences are generalized. Skinner called these distorted tacts. This means that tacts controlled in a small group or community will always be prone to bias. In the extreme case, a verbal unity will appear to be attacked, but under the control of the community's words, and therefore properly be called an intraverbal. So, thinking about this, I keep wondering, is there such thing as pure tact?
No. Okay, my views on Skinner's categories have changed a lot since then. I mean, in that paper I was trying to agree with his categories and see how we can find different ways of looking at social processes affecting what we talk about and how we talk.
Sorry to interrupt you, but really just...
Oh, sorry.
Sorry about that.
Sorry, I've got to stay away from the computer because if I touch it, it's probably going to go off air. And I keep going like this.
Yes, this is...
And Guy gets worried that I'm going to knock his computer and we'll go black, all dark on you. So in that paper, I was trying to use Skinner's categories to sort of see how much mileage, does that make sense? How much mileage we can get from Skinner's categories to explain some of the language stuff that we know goes on. And that's where the passage you read from was one of those where I was trying to sort of say distorted tax. Now I have a very different view now, I think, on tacting and more on the behaviour that Skinner would have called tacting. And that comes from really looking a lot more at the question of why do we tact? If tacting is like there's a cup, there's a Guy, there's some glasses. You know, why do we go around the world saying what things there are in the world anyway? What that's meaning is we actually need to know more about how those sort of statements function in social situations. So why did I say tact cup just now? So that's one angle, is looking more at the when and where do we actually tact things. I mean, I'm sitting here now, and I'm not going, uh-oh.
No, it's right. It's right.
Okay, our screen went blank.
Keep
Sorry.
going.
I'm sitting here now, but I'm not tacting everything. I'm not saying cup, phone, paper, bookcase, ceramic. So what are the conditions under which I will say the things that are around me? And again, that then means, well, we need to analyse how what are conversations doing anyway? What are conversations? What are the different sorts of conversations? What does my listener do? I mean, Guy would be bored if I just sat here, hi Guy, come into my office, cupboard, bookcase, roof, if I just started tacting. So it's not saying tacting's wrong. Sorry?
It would be really funny.
He'd probably say, oh yeah, Bernard's crazy as normal. Yeah. So it's more about we need to sort of do a lot more analysis about when do we say what things are anyway. Now, to jump to the end point, these days I would probably say that I've got more extreme views now. My more extreme views are that all language, if it's something to do with talking, it's only to do with people. Even if it's thinking, if it's talking that's thinking, it's always got to do with people. There's no talking where we just, people are not part of the equation, which again is something Skinner actually really said. All of his categories actually had social as part of the contingencies, either as discriminative stimulus that was part of the response or the consequences. So in that sense, I would probably say, well, in terms of those, all tax are distorted tax. But I would also probably say something that may sound really weird to behaviour analysts who have read Skinner 57, and that's that tax are really intraverbals, actually. Yeah, I know. It'll take a long time thinking about it if you even get the idea eventually. Language is to do with people and other words and other relationships, and saying bookcase is not really to do with the bookcase. Otherwise, why don't I just say everything that's around me now? Computer, headphones, water bottle, Guy's glasses. Yeah, so in fact, I would probably collapse most of his categories and focus more on, in terms of contingencies, everything is really intraverbal in terms of what we talk about.
Yeah, that's the main impression. This is the main impression I get when I read your text, Bernard. I don't know if I got you right, but when it comes to the history of philosophy, when you see the linguistic turn we had in the 50s and 60s, I guess this is the main point those philosophers are making. We are trapped in language, and so far we are trapped in language. All tacting must be, to the limit, a kind of intraverbal. Would it be right? So do you agree with this? Do you think it is too postmodernist?
Yes, indeed. They would. What I think you have to be aware of is clearly separating the talking about things from, which is to do with people. So I just have a constant thing that if it's anything to do with talking or thinking, it's to do with relationships with people and what you're doing in there. So again, you know, if I'm tacting Guy, you know, why would I tact anything? Oh, Guy, there's a cup there. You know, well, if it's reinforced, let's say, by Guy paying attention, well, isn't that manding then? Isn't a tact a mand then? It's a mand that's not obvious. I'm not saying, Guy, pick up your cup. I'm not even hinting. Oh, Guy, there's a cup. Not even if that's not meant to be a hint to pick up your cup. But if I'm having an effect on it. So if I'm saying something and having an effect on a person, I think that's always the case, then why isn't that manding?
In terms of the concepts, there's sort of a way out, which I'm not sure I agree, but I think that's what Skinner said, that should be considered as a mend, because everything sort of have this sort of generalized reinforcer, then the mend should be always like specific reinforcer. So you can't actually say that this is a mend because attention is generalized, so it would be tact.
Okay, so
yeah, it's a trick. I think it's a trick, actually.
And I think that's what he probably would have said.
Yeah.
Except my question then is, well, what sort of a distinction is it if you can only distinguish it because one's specific to, like, an intention I have, I specifically want him to pick it up, versus I'm just saying it. Is that a very good distinction? Is my next question. This is why I don't really use his categories, because I don't think that's a very good way. How specific does it have to be? What if I'm just loosely something? Something going on?
Yeah, the thing is, would you mind exploring a bit more how all of this would be intraverbal?
Okay, so I probably wouldn't use those words then.
Yeah, just to draw from that concept and build those concepts and stuff.
Okay, it gets to the idea of virtual worlds that was talked about in the 1992 paper that you mentioned earlier, about virtual, and Moscovici saying basically the difference between that a lot of what we do or we think we do is actually talking about things, not doing them. So, you know, oh, I love racing fast cars. I really love fast cars and Lamborghinis and all of that. Now, I've never had a Lamborghini. I've never been in one. I don't think I've ever seen a Lamborghini, but I can act as if I have knowledge of it. And I can actually act as if I've tacted one. So again, to be attacked, again, this is another category problem. To be attacked, tell me if I'm wrong, but I think Skinner would have said it's like the object really has to be there.
Yes.
So if I say there is a cup in my house, it's not attacked. If I say there is a cup, that's attacked.
Yeah.
What if I turn away and say there is a cup behind me? Okay, is that a tax?
I guess doesn't really have to bring you to a realism, but at least you have to have other people to confirm this to you, and that must be, I don't know, in a sense exist, but it's different than talk about something that you don't experience it. I guess that's the biggest difference to intraverbal. it's like verbal behavior over verbal behavior, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes, I just still haven't found it. So I mean, especially where I turn away and say there is a cup behind me. How you class that? What if I mean, we also sort of look in the direction and say there is a cup. Now his cup. Let me just tell you. Where is that? Oh, there we go.
Are you really good at this?
This is Guy's cup. It's a Doctor Who, of course. It's a Doctor Who cup.
Yes.
Okay.
Nice
Now, then
1 liter of coffee here.
1 liter of coffee. So then I have a question of, well, is the tact only a specific amount of detail? If I say, there is a cup, it's looking like a tact because I'm experiencing it. Guy, as you said, Guy then responds in a way that's about seeing the cup. But, you know, what about if in 10 minutes I can say, oh, there's a cup, but you know, it's when you sort of, you're not really looking at it, but you can still say it. Does that make sense? I can say, you know, if you ask me, is there a cup there? And I can go, yeah, there's a cup, but I'm not actually going to look at it. Where is that? When does it become an intraverbal? At what point did it magically become an intraverbal? And what about, you know, the police box? When you say, Bernard, when you say there's a cup, did you mean there is a Doctor Who cup? Were you talking about that detail of the cup? Now, what I'm getting to is that we could make a distinction. We could work out some way to do with the stimulus properties, my experience, how in contact, how much attention I'm giving. And if I give it a certain amount of attention, like I don't look at the details, I don't read the police box. If I get a certain amount of detail, then we say, well, that's a tact, but anything else is an intraverbal. I'm thinking, well, that may not be a good way to go with it. The other problem I have is where, I think I called this something in that paper, borrowed from Skinner, where we talk as if we were tacting. So Guy says to me, oh, did you see my cup, Bernard? Yes, yes, I saw your blue cup. But at the moment, I'm not looking at it. I'm looking this way.
Right.
Okay, but I can say that socially. I can say that, and in Skinner's terms, I can be reinforced that I can make it as if I'm in contact experiencing it. In the same way as I can talk about, yeah, Lamborghinis, I know Lamborghinis, yeah, I'm an expert in Lamborghinis. I've seen blue ones, I've seen red ones, you know, I can go really fast. Now, none of that's true. I've never touched a Lamborghini in my life. So again, I'm actually giving the form of what he would call a tact, but socially it's just as important. And this is where the virtual worlds came in, that I'm thinking a lot of what we say that we know sounds like tacting or previous tacts. Yes, I saw his cup. I had contact with his cup. But in fact, I'm disguising it as something else. Now, to me, that requires a new category or a new way of analysing, a new look at what I am doing. Why am I doing that? What's reinforced talking in that way? You know, I seem really knowledgeable because I know an awful lot. You know, I can tell you all about, let's think of a country, Scandinavia. I can tell you all about Stockholm and Scandinavia, the Swedish people. I can seem like I'm a tacting expert. But in fact, I've never been to Scandinavia. I've only ever seen 1 or 2 Swedish people in my life, or Norwegians in my life. But so what we can do is we find that we can start to appear like tacting. And I think my problem was that when I tried to clearly define then a tact from an intraverbal, it wasn't clear enough, and it didn't include enough of the reinforcing side or punishing side of the contingency. There wasn't enough about the social relations, what makes it, what do I have to do to make it a tact? Does someone have to be there? Does someone have to respond? What if I just said, oh, there's a box and Guy, there's a police box and Guy does nothing? Or is his absence of responding part of the contingency. It just became, that may not be a good way to analyse real behaviour. Let me just say, because most of the people listening are behaviour analysts in training, I'm not saying that I or someone else has got a better way to do it. I'm just saying I didn't find those categories very useful in the long run. I'd rather focus on, well, when do we talk about cups? What does it do in our conversation? What does it do to our relationship? Guy might have been having that police box cup for weeks, coming into my office for weeks, and I've never mentioned it. And he's quite upset because it was his favourite little cup, and he keeps bringing it to Bernard's office, and Bernard never comments on it. And all he wants me to do is to say, Guy, I love that cup. That's a really, really cool cup. And he's quite upset that I have never said that before. That may be the case. I want to start exploring that side of it more than how do I categorize my statement. And if I haven't, he keeps bringing that cup along to meetings with me. I've never commented on it. I've just ignored it. And then one day I say, Guy, I love that cup, by the way. Do we learn much by saying, oh, that's a tact? Does that help us very much? Something really big's going on in the social relationship when I finally say, Guy, I love that cup of yours. That's a really cool, I wish I had one. That's a really cool cup. Okay. What's really important about that bit of conversation is not to do, is it tacting the cup, or is it an intraverbal from a previous time that I might have seen? It's about, well, what's it doing to the relationship? That's something big that's happening here. And and that I'm informed about that from behaviour analysis. That's what tells me the words have their impact on the relationship, on what Guy does and will do in the future, what he's done in the past. So that's what I want to get into and analyse. And unlike the 92 paper, I don't want to spend as much time trying to say, well, can I fit Skinner's categories into that bit of conversation? Can I twist his categories, call them distorted? And back to your real question then, well, I don't think there are any a pure tact would be, I don't know what that would be. I'd sit up on a mountain top.
Maybe when you're learning the language, or learning to speak, something like that.
Well, when you're learning language and speaking, isn't that really socially, people are really telling you how to do it? And don't call it a cup, that's a mug, Bernard. Don't call it a cup, it's a mug. So in fact, learning is actually probably in some ways less pure. To me, pure would be if the social contingency part it was so generalised that I just went round naming things. If my reinforcement for saying things was so generalised that my whole life was spent going around going, computer, cup, headphones, computer, photo, clock, and I don't care about there's nothing else is happening in response to that. That would be probably a pure tacting behaviour on my part, but it'd also be pretty crazy behaviour as well. I'll get locked up for that.
Professor, I have a question. Yeah, when you were talking and when I was reading your article, I was thinking about something. There are two different things. The first thing is the person that acts as tacting, right? And the second is that person's behavior as a stimulus to other people.
As what?
As a stimulus to other people.
Oh, yeah.
So the other people, right, the verbal community around, will reinforce that people that's tacting or not tacting by some criteria, right? And I think that criteria may be the tacting, cultural practice called tacting, like when you see people trying to describe the world and you reinforce that. It was that you were talking about when you wrote the paper or something like that.
You get it?
Yeah, I think it was. I understand the question or comment. You were trying to say, well, there are people very generalised who might reinforce tacting and talking about things. I have a lot of problems. This again is just something for you to think about. I'm never sure I'm correct on anything, but I know Jacob Cantor had a lot of problems with the way Skinner would use the word stimulus. Cantor used setting event a lot, that we don't necessarily have a discriminative stimulus, but there are a whole lot of setting events that bring things about. Now, there are certainly cases where the setting events are a particular stimulus. Like if you get a Skinner box with a rat, okay, there are not many setting events there. There's a big obvious light flashing, and everything else is pretty dull. One of the things I have kept coming across thinking about all these issues is that when I look at the real life stuff, like you were describing, Enki. Sorry, I'm having trouble with your name. It's my fault. Not used to pronouncing words. When you come to the real life stuff, it's like, put really loosely, it's like the setting events become everything. And singling out a stimulus or a discriminative stimulus for a contingency, singling anything out, especially from the history, if you start including history, which again, in the Skinner box, you don't deal with history very much. You tend to get naive rats and you just build your own history of a certain contingency. Maybe you change it, but not much is done on long histories. It's sort of, to me, it sort of becomes that the setting events just become way more important than any particular stimulus. So even if I'm talking to Guy, what I'm talking to Guy about may end up becoming like a rehearsal for other people. And I don't really care what Guy does when I... This is not true. Not really. I do care, but I don't really... it may not be... It doesn't really matter what Guy does when I'm talking, because in general, when I'm talking, I'm rehearsing for my second year class, my third year class, other friends, and talking. So it's almost like... I think this is what Jacob Cantor was getting at, that in many real life situations, the setting events are way bigger determinants than any particular stimulus. And if we try and look for the discriminative stimulus, we're not going to really be able to find one. So in the sort of big general settings you were talking about in your question, I would say there's a lot of things going on. Now this brings me to another point of where I'm a little bit different to what I was in 1992. I now use the word context to talk about setting events. So most of the things I look at, especially talking, but behavior where we're talking or writing, there is no easy stimulus. There is no one or even two or three discriminative stimuli for what contingencies there might be involved. There's a whole lot of context, and there's normally many bits to it. So things that I do as an adult with a long history, very long history, there's a lot of context setting events behind anything I do. There's not many situations where there's like you can pinpoint a stimulus. This happens because when this stimulus I behave this way and this happens. So again, it's not anti-Skinner what I'm saying. It's more saying real life is not matching the simple situation that he has worked in, or he worked in, sorry. We need new tools. This is where I'm coming from right now. Welcome back.
Hi.
Hi. Is that we need new tools for exploring what Cantor would have said the setting events rather than looking for a discriminative stimulus. And I think language is one of those things. And that's why I think, tacting and intraverbals don't help me much anymore, because when I get real situations, real life, I don't find it's useful to look for a discriminative stimulus or two as a compound maybe. There's a whole lot of historical setting events, context, relationship events that are determining what I do and what happens when I do it and what I do next and what I do after that and what I do next time I meet you and things like that. So if we're going to analyze those, I think we have to get away from the thinking and experimental tools that behavior analysis has developed. Not because they're wrong, you know, the principles are still fine. It's just that real life, and that's why I like context or setting events better. Don't look for a discriminative stimulus for the little interaction. I mean, they're very rarely little interactions. I mean, you know, pass the salt. We all know this one, don't we? From 1957. Pass the salt. Thank you. You know, those little things are very rare. You watch people sitting around to dinner, it's like, oh, yeah, hey, oh, yeah. Oh, did you see that thing on? Yeah, oh, right, yeah. How'd the Boteco go? Yeah, oh, I talk too much, but yeah, I always talk too much. Yeah. That's what real conversations are, not pass the salt. Thank you. So what I found was I needed new tools to try and analyze that. Discourse analysis provided a lot of tools for looking at the language bits, but they still don't do a good job of analyzing the relationships, the history of relationships that are going on there. Now, one of the ways I think about this when I get into trouble, which I do all the time, thinking about it, is I might have written this somewhere, but tables. If you've got a table, like I've got a table in front of me, made of wood, that's got a molecular structure. Okay, it's made up of molecules of various carbon things and other things in there. Okay, now that's true. I believe in molecular analysis. I believe I could analyze this table into its molecular structure. Okay, I'm not denying that. However, if I want to plane, is that word the same in Portuguese? If I want to plane...
I can't remember how to say that in Portuguese.
He's forgotten his Portuguese, yeah. If you want to like paint, or I want to cut the table, I don't need the molecular structure to do that. There's too many molecules. I can't analyze my cut by which molecules on this side, which molecules are on that side. I've got to just cut it, and I take into account, I think about all sorts of the grain of the wood maybe. You know, maybe some molecular analysis might help me, but you know, normally I can cut a table and not need molecular structure. So where I'm getting to there is when I'm looking at complex human social behavior, and language is one of those. Language is, you know, the most complex probably of all. I can do weird things with language. You know, I can just imagine now a purple butterfly landing on Marcella's shoulder. I can see her in front of me, and I can imagine a purple butterfly landing on her shoulder. I mean, that's really complex stuff. There is no purple butterfly, but that whole language. Oh, sorry, he believes me. What are you on? You know, we can do amazingly complex things to other people. I'm doing it to you people. Can you all see Marcella? Can you imagine a purple butterfly flitting around and then landing on her shoulder and moving its wings? I mean, that language is doing incredibly complex stuff to all you people at the moment, and me as well, for that matter. So when we come to that, I think in terms of the table and the molecular analysis, I'm not denying that all of this complex behavior like the butterfly, there are learned contingencies between things I do, bits of little units of what I do, and the consequences that happen in the past, in my childhood. Some of them like, that's a cup I've been using for years. Some like, oh, purple butterfly landed on Marcella's shoulder. I made up, but that comes, as we know, I didn't just make it up inside my head. That comes from previous responses and descriptive and language stuff and poetry. Talking poetically, which does different things to people, doesn't it, Marcella? So what I'm saying is that if I really want to understand, and more importantly, I think change, intervene, complex human behavior and language, I don't want to wait round until we've got a perfect, like, molecular analysis of every one of the historical contingencies, current contingencies, for me to say that. I want to find some tools where I can do that without having to go to those finer details. But what I'm getting to is defending myself, so all of the people listening don't hate me, is that doesn't mean that the contingency analysis is wrong or Skinner's principles are rubbish or anything. It just means that with complex historical behaviors with long histories, like saying the word purple, do I have to analyze where my history of saying purple what the history of that's been, all of the contingencies, to understand why I said purple. Now, you know, I don't want to have to do that. We'll never finish that job. I want to find some tools where keeping the principles and keeping the general approach. So I'm not going to start saying, you know, well, it's not a contingency analysis, it's because I have a mind and my mind can invent things. Yeah, I'm not going to do that either. Psychology tried that for 150 years and it's a big mess, basically. So I want it to be all the principles, but you know, I just, you know, from that paper and my '94 book where I looked at all of the social analyses in behavior analysis, you know, I just found they didn't get to the detail, and later on I realized, well, they don't have to do the detail. If you're trying to
Professor,
wait for
is this that paper that you asked, 18 ways of acting alone can be social, something like that? Is this that
Yep,
paper?
that was one of the. Yeah, there was a few papers. I'm putting my the way I'm sort of trying to work now. I'm putting into a book at the moment. And I teach it over here. If you want to come and do my courses, I teach this way over here. I don't tell the students it's behavior analysis because I'm not allowed to teach a whole social psychology course on behavior analysis. So I don't tell them that, but that's okay. But what I'm really trying to do is find how do we describe the context of people, the social relationships, the history, in enough detail that we can understand where these behaviors come from, and in general, what are the consequences of the context? What consequences do these contexts hold that people's behaviors get shaped and changed gradually, repeated, and whatever?
So,
it's just
Professor, what we're saying is that your approach nowadays is like coming from the society to the individual, and how the society can model the individual, can shape the individual. Is that right? Because I think that here in Brazil we have social psychology is mainly Marxist. I think that we have some. There are some approaches here that are related to Moscovici and something like that. And when you try to put these things together, Marx say that the human is a product and the producer of history, right? So when you sometimes when you're speaking, I believe that I'm seeing something like I'm seeing how the society can create the individual, much more like the 60s social psychology in the United States. Am I right like that in my commentary, or am I completely wrong?
I think so, and very much like Moscovici in 1960, because again, one of the big contexts for talking is the verbal community. So when I say things, again, I'm not just making them. I haven't just made them up myself. There are things that, you know, most of what I say has come from things said in society, what people tell me they believe, things I've read, things we talk about, things we chat. You know, so when I say, for example, I believe in equality and equality between genders and equality between people of different working abilities. You know, that's not. There's never been a tacting with that. You know, I've never actually gone and, you know, actually looked at gender inequalities. I mean, I have just my own little experience, but I've never gone and done a big survey of society and gone and talked to women in different roles. And when I say, you know, and of course, you know, women on the same job get paid less than men do. This is still historically true. You know, there's nothing to do with tacting in there. I've never gone and talked to people, talked to women in same jobs as men. You know, all of that I get through the way society talks and what talk is around me. Again, this is where discourse analysis is good, because they'll say the same thing. These discourses are not something I invent. They're out there floating around. And even if I disagree and I say, well, actually, no, I think the genders are pretty much equal now, at least in Australia, which is not true. I'm getting that. That's a discourse that's not mine. It's part of a general one. that's around us. So again, I haven't got the answers. It's more that with this sort of approach, and even with Skinner's approach, you can start to see where that societal starts getting into our contingencies, where the context starts getting into it. If it's cognitive, then it's really just, you know, we store it in the head. If I decide, you know, that gender inequality is a bad thing, I do that because I've taken in some information, I've processed it, I've analysed it in my head, and then I've come up with the decision, my decision that, you know, my discourse, it's my discourse I invented, that gender inequality is a bad thing. Okay, so, yeah, but behaviour analysis, discourse analysis, social constructionism all give me other ways where I can start to think that's not true, it's not just my little thinking. I've learned that that's all come through society and discourses in books, in people, talking to people, implied discourses that people say, and that's how. So I think back to your question. Yes, I think there's a lot of similarities. It's just we're still trying to find the ways. Like I don't think Moscovici really got a lot of good tools for how does the societal get into our behaviour. If I put it bluntly like that, how does societal discourses get into my behaviour? He didn't really give us the proper tools for that. The people who followed Moscovici, unfortunately, they went very cognitive, and so there are people who talk about social representations as something in your head. I have social representations, they're in my head, stored away. Okay, and it lost the whole purpose of Moscovici. In fact, so what I like is, again, I haven't got the answers, it's just there are some ways there that we can start to, so when I hear somebody, I'm in conversation and somebody says to me, well, you know, Bernard, I believe that there is a real problem with gender inequality in Australia. I can see that, not as something about that person, their mind, their brain, how they learn, how they talk. I can see that as that society is talking to me through that person. I can see there's a context, a setting event behind what their talking is. So I can, you know, I mean, it's as if I can see it there. Once I've you know, understood more of this, I can actually see and remember that this is society talking, not that person has decided on the basis of their cognitive processing that they have come up with the idea that, you know, gender inequality is still very bad in Australia. They're getting it through this context. Yep.
Professor, there is an approach, I don't know if you had contact with that. It's a cultural materialistic approach from Marvin Harris. He has an approach that the knowledge, probably you have read his book, one of his books. The knowledge has a material basis, right? So when he say, for instance, that the cows of Indians, they do not eat cows, and they say that the cows are sacred or things like that. It's maintained because there is a material there is a material reason for this to be kept. When you try to do that, are you not looking to history? You're saying that sometimes when you look to just behavior analysis tools, you don't look to history, and that history that precedes the individual being the situation. But when you look for Marvin Harris approach like that, and there are a lot of behavior analysts nowadays that are using Marvin Harris approach, trying to dialogue with him, right? I think that the problem you said about history is solved. Am I right, or am I saying something stupid here?
No, absolutely not. No, I think you're quite correct. The worry I have about behaviour analysts is that they only read Marvin Harris. There's a lot of good anthropology which is saying, you know, there's a cultural context to almost everything we do, which is saying cultural to me is a social history. there's a social history to what we say. That to me is cultural. One of the problems I've had is that when you get to this point, psychologists and anthropologists, they have to somehow explain. They can't see a material base. They want there to be a material base, but they can't see one. So what do you do at that point? Now, Marvin Harris is one of the few who've tried to talk about it as more material. Psychologists, as we know, they take it off to cuckoo land and say, well, it must have happened inside my brain. I myself originated this. I'm an originator, a creator. They come up with all sorts of weird things. So what they're trying to do is say, to me, the question is, I can't see, I'm seeing what's going on, but I can't see the material basis. The only thing I can see that's material is the brain and the neurons and the firing going on. Therefore, the material will be in the brain. That's the only thing I can see. Now, to me, this is exactly Marvin Harris, I think. That's why I'm totally agreeing with you. There is a material base, but what I've found through my entire career is it's very difficult to see that. And part of that is why Skinner uses the word generalized. He's doing the same trick. He can't see it because he doesn't analyze social behavior very well. And so his trick, which is no better or worse than calling it a psyche, I think, is to say, oh, that's generalized. I used to do the same thing. That's generalized. That's why we can't see it. So when you agree with everything, that's generalized. So the question, well, so where do different theorists put this missing element? Now, discourse analysts, they go back and forth. Some of them put it into the brain. Some of them put it into like a societal process, but they don't explain it very well. Skinner says, well, it's generalized. That's why you can't see what their consequences are, because they're generalized. Most anthropologists say, they have really weird ones. They say it's sort of like it's as if the social construction has a life of itself. And someone like Rosaldo, he sort of believes that, you know, he's a real social constructionist, the extreme. You know, if I say purple butterfly, then there is a reality. Purple butterfly is real. Now, so what's he doing? He's trying to, well, why can't I see it then? Where's the material basis? And he's saying, his trick, I mean, Skinner would say, well, you're talking about a purple butterfly, and the consequences, the reality, the consequences are sort of, well, they're generalized, so we can't see them. So he's sort of covering up the problem. Psychologists say, well, it's in your brain, they're covering up the problem. A lot of the anthropologists cover up the problem by saying it's in the structure, or it's a reality, it's another reality. That's what Rosaldo would say. Purple butterflies have another sort of reality. They're a virtual world, or they're, what's Gergen's term, an interpretive world. But what I want you to see is in common is all of these people get to a certain point, and again, I've been there, I still am there really, where you know, I mean, theoretically, I know there are consequences. I don't disbelieve behavior analysts. I don't think behavior just originates or anything like that. I don't believe in virtual, you know, purple butterfly worlds or anything like that. It's the consequences, but I can't see them, the material see them anymore. So what trick do I use at that point? Now, what I'm trying to do in the last few years is stop having tricks and go out and describe. The answer to me now is to describe those contexts as best you can. Try and do very thick descriptions of those contexts. Now, thick descriptions, I'm sure you know, brings in another anthropologist, Geertz. So do thick descriptions. You won't find discriminative stimuli in those contexts. Discriminative stimuli are far too specific, little detailed ones. You will find them with children. You may, you know, with people with autism, you may find specific, very specific ones. But for general life, you won't. That's why what I'm trying to get to is, my goal for teaching and for context is that I can see somebody do something, and I can, at least conceptually, whatever, I can see very real context that might be taking place for that happening. So, you know, why do you come Cesar. Why did you come on? Why did you agree to come on Boteco today? Now, I don't know the answer. There's many answers, I'm sure. What I want to train myself to do, I don't want to say, oh, you felt it was a good idea, because that puts it back into a hidden world. I don't want to say, oh, the sort of generalized consequences for being on here. It's good for you in a very generalized, that covers it up. What I want to be able to do is...
Yeah,
I want to finish off. I want to be able to see you on here and think about all of the context. What are the economic contexts, for example, that might be to do with you being here? Well, you want to finish your PhD, get a job, you want to be known in Brazil because you'll probably get a job in Brazil. I'm sure that's not your main context for it. I'm sure it's lurking somewhere. But there are social contexts. There are friends. You can have a good time, except today when Bernard's raving. You can normally have a good time on there. There's historical things you've been on before. What I want to do, my goal is to be able to, as if I can see them in their material, like hovering behind you, like Sherlock. If you know Sherlock, Sherlock sees these things behind people. So that's sort of where I'm heading, to try and come up with a material basis. It's not definitive. I'm not trying to say, well, that is the discriminative stimulus and the consequences are these. That's what got you on Boteco today. I'm trying to come up with a range of possibilities, a range of contexts, but keep them material. And that's what Marvin Harris was trying to do, I think, as well. But for me, the description, the process is we've got to go through this description, which I tell people that, that's one thing Skinner did really well originally. When he started, Forster and Skinner, 1957, they had the rat in the box. One of the things they did was describe the entire context and setting events, all of the details they had. Remember have you read that through? It's a great book, Contingencies of Reinforcement. Schedules of Reinforcement. Yeah, he described the entire setting events, like even that one of the lights was a bit loose, and the rat started playing with it because it was loose. So what he did was he described all of the possible setting events in that experimental chamber. My problem is when he then started talking about social behavior in the, whatever that book is, and Walden 2, verbal behavior, what you find there is suddenly the data disappears. There's no descriptions of, well, what is social behavior? What do people do socially anyway? What are the typical concepts? He stopped doing the describing and he started, talking off the top of his head about social processes. So I think we've got to go back a step, go back to Skinner 57, the two books, Forster and Skinner 57, and Skinner's verbal behavior, and say, okay, well, let's start again. This time, let's actually describe what do people do in social behavior. What's the history? What typical histories do we have? What are the societies? What's everybody else doing? What's different about being in Australia to being in Brazil? I mean, you're quite right, Enrique. You're quite right that it's different over there. There are societal things. We didn't have the revolutionary thing in the 60s in Australia. It's a real wimpy, boring place. None of that fervour there. You did. Other countries did. That's changed the way you think and talk and discourses. Things that would occur to me don't occur to you. Things that would occur to you, like people who are exploring the stuff, don't occur to most people in Australia. We need to go back to 57, if you like, and describe, which is what he did with the rat cage. He described all the possible setting events and then started intervening. We haven't done that step yet, and that's what I'm trying to do, is go back and find descriptive ways of doing that. He sort of sat in his office, passed the salt. I mean, when he was writing verbal behavior, he talked to his wife over dinner, he talked to his kids and got a bit of verbal behavior. He read Shakespeare's sonnets to get some verbal behavior. He passed the salt continuously to get verbal behavior, but he didn't go out and sit in a bar. Boteco didn't go sit in a Boteco and what are people talking about? What is knowledge? And that's where I think we have to go back to. Yeah.
I think we are getting out of time. I just want well, I prepared some questions. I will try to be direct here.
Yeah, just a second. Actually, we have a bunch of questions from people who are watching us, and so since we've been talking for more than an hour, let's try to at least talk a little bit about each question. So in this next 15 or 20 minutes, let's try to be faster so we can talk about. Okay, so you can go first.
You know that it's difficult because it's complex questions, but please, if you could try to.
Yeah, Henrique, will you go first? Do you want to go the last question?
My question is the same as Angelo Sampaio that asked the question in the chat on Facebook. What's your opinion about meta-contingency concept of Sigrid Glenn? Do you have an opinion about this concept, Professor?
I mean, that's probably the one of the few ways that behavior analysts have tried to tackle these bigger questions, and so it's great. It's great for that. I have problems with it, but then again, as you know, I have problems with everything. As I said, seriously, I have problems with the way I talk, and I find problems with it, and I try and work with it. As I understand it, and maybe I don't understand meta-contingencies very well, what she's trying to say is that she's trying to get the generalized, and pull apart a bit more detail, which is really good, and saying there are some cases where we may not get the effect of what I do, may not have much of an effect. Like if I start saying new knowledge, like for example, Guy is now the King of Australia. Oh. Go Guy. Is the King of Australia. So I've got a new knowledge there. Now I think what she's saying is that at the moment it's relying on a few people to punish me or whatever, and you can all call me an idiot, and he's obviously not King of Australia or anything like bad luck, or anything like that. But what she's trying to say, I think, is there are some situations, contexts, in which if more people start saying it, then you start developing that it's not that I get reinforced more for saying that bit by bit, it's more that the whole environment starts reinforcing it, a larger group of people, and that can do something. We can start doing something with that knowledge, cooperating. We could buy him a crown to put on his head or something, I don't know. So now, so where I'm getting to is, I think that's good. That's one step to try and say that social contingencies are not simple.
Sorry, I should have said.
Right. Yeah. If social contingencies are not simple discriminative stimuli or a social reinforcer to another discriminative stimuli when you respond, then how can we dissect this? How can we pull it apart? And what I think she's done is pointed out one way, which is really good, that you can start to get a bigger societal. It's basically developing a setting event, in Cantor's words, and that's if I have understood meta-contingencies, it's like a group of people can start reinforcing a knowledge or something, and then it's like it gets its own momentum, but it's not, it's still real, it's material, but then it can start to become a bigger contingency that affects everybody, if you like to put it loosely like that. So my basic response to that work is, yes, it's a good start. There's a lot more other things in social behaviour and language use that are important as well, but that's one way. Simple contingencies can start to do things, can behave in ways that don't look like simple contingencies anymore. So a bunch of people working with a simple contingency can start creating something that doesn't look like a simple contingency anymore and needs a new word. So she proposed meta-contingency, because it's no longer acting like one of the simple contingencies. Now, I think there's a lot of other ways, a lot of other things as well as that one, but that certainly is one good way, and that's how I would probably think about it. And there are various similar things in social psych, in interventions, in social sciences to do with society and societal processes along those lines, of how a smaller group can, and Moscovici even said a sort of similar meta-contingency thing, I think, that a small group of people can start talking amongst themselves, and eventually it gets to the point where, you know, it becomes more powerful than you, if you like. So it's not acting like a simple contingency anymore, but that does not mean it's not made from Skinnerian principles. That's what I want to emphasize once again. You know, they are there, it's just to then trace the individual, single personal individual historical contingencies in a meta-analysis is just too difficult. It's just like, you know, molecular analysis before I chopped my table in half. That doesn't mean we disbelieve they're there. They are there, but we don't need to do that. And so she's saying something very brave, I think, which is that a meta-contingency can develop. It's real. It's made out of little contingencies, if you like, but it no longer acts in the same way as a single one. But then also, you know, we don't have to go back and reanalyze. If I'm affected by something societal, we don't have to go back and analyze every little connection that's there. We can do something. So that's probably too long an answer, but yes, it's certainly one way to go beyond the single contingency approach without going into, you know, brain mode, mind mode, or anything like that.
William Baum has actually a good way out of this. I mean, his molar perspective as opposed to molecular perspective, I think it's a nice way out of this mess, that trying to analyze every single instance of every single behavior happening in every single social setting is not going to happen.
Yeah, the only,
I agree with Bernard.
Yeah, no, I agree with a lot of what Baum says. The only problem I have is I find that when he goes to start analysing the molar, he does something that a lot of behaviour analysts do. He tries to look for situations that look like simple contingencies. Now that's what in my 1994 book, that's what most of the social behaviour, people analysing social behaviour in behaviour analysis did. They looked for situations, social situations that looked like a Skinner box. There was something simple.
Yeah.
Pass me the salt. Thank you. It looks like pressing a bar and a little reinforcer drops down the tube. And I mean, Baum stuff I really like, but I just think even his molar examples, he's trying to make it look like a typical 3-term contingency or a 4-term contingency even.
Sorry to interrupt you, I guess.
Oh, this is getting late. Yeah. So he's trying to keep the old way, whereas at least Sigrid Glenn is trying to think in a way that doesn't look like simple contingencies. That's why I like the meta-contingency.
Yeah, you know, Bernard, you've mentioned, Enrique, I guess, mentioned Marvin Harris and his perspective, cultural materialism. And, well, before it, you have mentioned Cantor, I guess. And then one of our viewers asked the question that makes me wonder about, do we need a materialistic perspective for behavior analysis? Do we need to be materialist? And one of the things, I guess, people are afraid to deny materialism is the assumption that if you are not a materialist, you're necessarily a relativist. Everything goes. And then one of our viewers made a question about it. Felipe can put in a different way, maybe Felipe.
Yeah, what she said was, my mic on, okay. What she said was she wanted to know your opinions, Bernard, on the relation between contextualism and relativism. If relativism is something that we should be avoiding. What do you think about that?
Is that a limited question?
Okay, just before I answer that, I've read somewhere something that for me kind of sums up what I think about Marvin Harris's work, although I think it's really good. I think usually behavior analysts, myself included, we fall in the trap of thinking that, okay, once we established there's a material basis for something social, then that explains the thing. It doesn't. It doesn't explain the whole thing. It's like the metaphor I read somewhere was like taking the pearl for the grain of sand kind of thing. Like the oyster, suddenly a grain of sand get inside the oyster, and then it creates a whole pearl. Okay, acknowledging there's a grain of sand inside the pearl is not explaining the pearl. I'm not being dismissive of materialism. It's just that I mean, this sort of materialism that thinks everything has to be a material cause in the sense of materialism as everything like physical structure and stuff. I mean, that kind of falls short for me. And
right. So there's two things there. One's the relativism, and one's the material basis. I guess there's different versions of material basis. I mean, for example, if you look at quantum mechanics now, there's no material basis like particles anymore there. They don't believe in particles even. So even in the most fundamental of material, studying material no longer thinks in terms of what we call material anyway. With the relativism, that's a tricky one. I sort of get to the same point that I did earlier, where I say that people thinking about these issues get to a certain point, are stumped. Does that make sense? Are stumped by it, and then have to come up with a solution, which they do by sticking it in the brain, in the mind, as generalized. It's generalized there, so you can't see it. Now, the main thing for relativism, when I read it, is it's to do with, it's when they get to explaining people's talk. So like, there's a purple butterfly landing on Marcella's shoulder. I can see it right now. What's the material basis of that? And that's where they get, we got a problem, folks. Houston, we got a problem. I can't say there is a butterfly there because she can't touch it. You know, but on the other hand, we don't want to say, well, that you're just stupid, Bernard. There's no, it's only words, you know. So, and there's no material basis to it. Now,
yeah, when we start making jokes about this, like, I mean, like a week later, I don't know, I could text Marcella and said, oh, something about the purple butterfly. Does it really matter? It wasn't like real.
Okay, so what I want to remind you of, my sort of way I get around this thinking, again, I think it's a problem, just we think in a certain way, and that causes us a problem at this point. I actually go back to a straight Skinnerian analysis, I'm afraid. I hate to do this to you. That's using Skinner to answer the problems. But to me, the material basis, or if you want to call it a solid material base, context base, is looking at what are the consequences, what are the setting events, what are the discriminative stimuli, if you want to call it that. That's where the material basis is. Okay, so why do we suddenly come up with a problem of relativism? Okay, it's because if I say Guy is sitting next to me, sorry, I can hit him, I can touch him, whatever, that seems fine. If I then say there is a purple butterfly, we've lost Marcella now, but there's a purple butterfly on her shoulder. Okay, well that's difficult. There's no material basis because we can't touch it. Okay, but go back to the principles. What is the material, consequential, contextual basis to me saying there is a purple butterfly? Well, it's in the material consequences of what people do when I say that. Just go back to the principles. It's still in the consequences, but don't forget, never forget. If I say something, the material basis is what people have done in the past, what they're doing now, how they act. And if Marcella, you know, quickly texts Guy to hit me because I talked about purple butterflies on her shoulder, I mean, that's real. So there is a reality, but the problem is because we don't normally see the social basis to language. I say there's a purple butterfly, and we just don't theoretically see the social basis to that. There are real people involved in that who taught me purple, Marcella. The butterfly being creative and poetic has a history as well in there. Because we can't see that, we sort of go, oh, where am I going to put this event? It's in a Platonic world, it's in the mind. Well, no, it's got a real material basis, and that's in the social consequences, what people do, everybody's going to start thinking I'm a lunatic because I'm talking about imaginary purple butterflies. That's real. They're going to lock me up now because I said that. That's real. So what I'm saying is when we hear words, I really want you to be able to look at, the material basis for these words is in the social relationships, the social context, the history, the cultural social history, the economic history. There is a real material basis. We don't have to go relativistic and say it's in some weird land somewhere. The problem is, and this is my fundamental problem I've already said, is that that's difficult to see. Conceptually, I know it's there. And Skinner, I think, you know, he said that one of the best people to say that. It's real. He never analysed it very well, though. He said, oh, it's generalised social. Let's forget about it now. It's not important. The details are not important. But, you know, that's what's real about it. So my way of getting around relativism when I fall into it is to say, well, hang on, this is about words. Where is that purple butterfly? Well, if you want a material basis, that purple butterfly, it's in all of the social reactions, cultural long-term reactions, things people do from me having said this. Maybe it's later on. Maybe, you know, someone will read this or listen to this broadcast in a couple of weeks, walk into my office and tell me I'm an absolute idiot and they're going to lock me up. You know, so that if you want a material basis to relativism, to me, that's what you've got to do. What I've been saying all along, study the real social basis to language, the setting events, the behaviours, the relationships, the context, the consequences, and all of that. Now, I believe we have an Anna question, and then we better finish. Is that right? I want to make a sandwich with you.
Yes,
well, I'm worried now. Is that sort of a metaphor for let's have lunch together, or is that like you're going back to cannibals and kings?
We're talking
you want to
about
make a sandwich of me? Is that like Marlon Harris cannibalism? What?
Of witches and cows and that book. But maybe, Felipe, could you do Anna's questions, maybe?
Yeah, we have one last question before we finish. This question, let me show it for you guys. This question is from our great friend, Anna.
Hi, Anna. She's a Facebook friend as well. Hi, Anna. You can't speak back, but...
yeah, she can't speak back. So here's the question.
Sorry.
How could we have a total, or at least a better comprehension of social behavior, specifically of language, in the sense of Skinner's complete verbal episode, without a better and more precise description of the listener behavior and about how it's acquired, developed, and maintained? Do we have a good comprehension of the basic process involved in listener behavior? Do we need it, and why? That's the question.
Okay, now there's a couple of interpretations. Sorry to be complex, I usually am. One is, the question is about, like, using every... Oh, can we have that question again? Sorry.
Yeah, can you put up the question again?
Sorry.
Yeah, I'll put it back.
It could be meaning, in everyday language, how do we understand what somebody said? It could mean that, or it could just mean, like, about the listener and the consequences from that. I mean, I don't think anymore in terms of a speaker, a listener, listener speaks, the listener speaks, the speaker speaks again. To me, it's a total episode, and the context for saying something is not just the words. And many times, the words are the minor thing. So if I say, what's something I could say that's a bit daring to be?
Daring.
Yeah. If I say, like, you know, oh, you got that stupid police box thing again.
Don't say that.
No, this is in quotes. I'm not really saying it. Anna might forgive me. No, Anna won't forgive me. If I said, for example, you know, oh, look at that stupid Doctor Who police box cup you've got. You know, understanding and listening to my words is only a minor part of this whole episode. The main thing about that episode is to do with our social relationship, which is now in jeopardy, having said, what's that stupid Doctor Who police box you've got there? So I don't want to analyse the listener behaviour outside of not just the interaction, but also out of the entire context of why are we talking at all? What's this doing to our relationship? What's our past relationship? Because they're very simple words. And if I said to Marcella, have you got a stupid Doctor Who cup, police box cup? It would be very different to saying to Guy, oh, you got a stupid Doctor Who police cup box. Oh, you got a wonderful Skinner cup.
Yeah, I have a wonderful.
Oh, Boteco. It's a Boteco one.
Yeah.
If I get to visit Brazil again, I'm going to get one of those for me.
Maybe.
So back to Anna. I'm not sure which bit of that question is. The first bit about the total comprehension of the social behaviour, I think the key difference to me from the Skinner's complete verbal episode is that he didn't include most of the social history, the social relationship. Because, you know, just think talking to a stranger on a bus is absolutely nothing like talking to Guy or talking to, you know, other close friends and people. So it's not about understanding the listener's behaviour, it's understanding the entire, even economic, believe it or not, social, cultural context of that little episode. And that's what I think, you know, discourse analysts aren't doing that very well either, mapping and describing all of that. So, you know, if I want to understand, Guy, why have you got that stupid Doctor Who police box as your cup still? You know, there's a whole lot of different ways that can be listened to. And so in some senses what I'm saying is the listening's not that important, the words are not that important. That verbal episode, I'd rather get rid of the word verbal and say social episode, because to me it's more of a social episode than a word episode. The words are one bit of it, but I could do it in a different way. I could do the social relationship of, what are you doing with that stupid Doctor Who police box without speaking? I could grab his cup and then smash it on the floor. Now, I'm not going to do that because it would get very ugly all of a sudden if I did that. But I could do the same relationship thing, like dissing him about his cup by smashing it, as I could by saying, what are you doing with that stupid Doctor Who cup? So to me, when you're talking in your question about comprehending the social behaviour, complete verbal episode, specifically the language, I would say no, not specifically the language. Don't go there. That's where the problems start. Don't start looking at that episode specifically at the language. Stop. Go back, Anna. You're going the wrong way. Do not go to the verbal, Anna. Go back to the entire episode. That's where you're going to find out what's going on, not just in the words. And I say, a lot of conversations, the words are the minor bit. The relationship, negotiating it, status, how well we're going to making sure I'm still friends with Guy after today and after threatening to smash his favourite cup. No, what we're doing mainly is negotiating the relationship. It's not about those words. That was just a tiny bit. And I could have done it in several ways. I could have hit him. I could have smashed it. I could have told him something different. I don't want to talk to you ever again. I could have. So the real episode is the complete social episode, of which the words are one little bit of it. But as I keep saying, in many cases, the words that are said are only the minor bit. Think back to Schwarzenegger. Go on. Clint Eastwood. Go on, make my day. Those words are a minor bit of what's going on. What's really going on is threatening.
Wasn't it Dirty Harry?
Yeah, go on, make my day. It's not about the words. So to call it I want to analyse the verbal episode. This probably sums up my entire paper and talk quite well. So let me finish maybe here. To understand that episode, to understand the words is a tiny bit of it. You really more need to know what is being negotiated in the relationship. So if you don't know Clint Eastwood movies, he's got his gun on the guy, and the guy's about to pick up his gun and try and shoot him first, and he goes, "Go on, make my day." The whole thing's about status, about the relationship, about threats, about bluffing him not to shoot. That's where the juicy part of the social behaviour is, not the words. So don't go to analyse the complete verbal behaviour, analyse the social. Now, to reiterate, Skinner was great, and in fact Skinner does define verbal as social behaviour and as a subcategory of social behaviour, but he even described the rat behaviour as social. Do you know that in a footnote? He described rat behaviour as social behaviour because the experimenter is involved.
Oh, yeah.
He was actually smart enough to realise that, but then my problem is he never followed through with the social analysis. He stuck with the words, he tried to analyse those, and he didn't really analyse Mann's tax intraverbals in terms of the social relationships very thoroughly at all. That's where, a lot of people, not just me, are now trying to say, well, let's fill this in. So, Anna, good question. I just want to urge you to analyze social, don't analyze words and verbal. Get that other analysis done, but it's not easy. Saying it's very easy, doing it's more tricky.
Yes, it is.
Well, we are totally running out of time. Is Felipe here? Maybe. Unfortunately, we gotta
Yeah, it's
end
time
the program.
Yeah, we have almost 2 hours of Boteco, so we should end now. I would like to thank everybody who was watching us. Thank to Anna, Aline, and Angelo, and everybody who made questions for us. There were more questions, but we can't talk for too long, although I would love that. And Gary,
Yes, probably
thanks a lot for
not.
participating with us. Guilherme, thank you. Henrique,
You're welcome.
thanks. And
Thank you for the invitation.
Yep, thank you for inviting me.
we hope to see you in Brazil sometime.
Oh, I'd love to go back there. Yep.
Or in Australia.
Yeah, oh yes, you're welcome over here. We've had Camilla Mouchon
Yeah,
visit
we,
over here
we
for a
have
year. She
invited
came over
her,
for a year.
but today we haven't invited her, but she was busy today, but she's nice.
Yeah.
Yep, and Guy, of course, is over for 3 or 4 years, so you're all welcome to come over and visit.
Put up an extra mattress or something at home.
Okay, so thanks everybody. Good night. And
Thank you,
see you
Philippe.
again
Good
on the
morning. Thank
next
you, morning.
Boteco.
It's morning over here.
Yeah.
Morning.
Yeah. Good morning.
Good morning.
We
Everyone.
We started at
For
8 o'clock.
Australians.
We started at 8 o'clock this morning. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.